Western Hemisphere presents a unique operational environment. It is a region defined not only by traditional security challenges, but also by humanitarian response, transnational threats, and a dense network of partnerships with allies and regional partners. Across this vast area of responsibility, space-enabled capabilities play a quiet but essential role. Satellite communications connect forces operating across remote terrain and maritime environments. Position, navigation, and timing enables precision and coordination. Space-based sensing provides awareness that would otherwise be impossible across such a wide and diverse region. Recognizing the growing importance of these capabilities, the Space Force recently established U.S. Space Forces Southern as its service component to United States Southern Command. This new organization is responsible for ensuring that Spacepower is fully integrated into operations across the SOUTHCOM theater, strengthening regional partnerships, enabling joint forces, and helping ensure that space-enabled capabilities remain reliable in both routine operations and potential crises. Today we're joined by the officer leading that effort, Colonel Brandon P. Alford, the commander of U.S. Space Forces Southern. In this role, he leads Space Forces efforts supporting U.S. Southern Command, integrating space capabilities into joint operations across Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. Our conversation focuses on how these capabilities support day-to-day operations, how partnerships strengthen regional security, and how the command is preparing for a future where space is increasingly contested. I'm Bill Woolf, and this is Spacepower. Today, I'm joined by Colonel Brandon P. Alford, commander of U.S. Space Forces Southern. In this role, Colonel Alford leads Space Force efforts supporting U.S. Southern Command, integrating space capabilities into joint operations across the Western Hemisphere. Colonel Alford, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, my friend. Great to see you as always, and thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Hey, before we get going, I just want to ask you a very important question. Who was the best instructor for you when you attended weapons school?
Oh, that's a tough question because there were so many wonderful leaders and instructors at weapons school. But my favorite and best instructor was a young major who was actually assigned to the Warfare Center and would come over and instruct us from time to time, named Hippie Wolf.
Thank you, sir. I'll pay you your $5 the next time I see you, or at least buy you a drink. Thanks again for taking time.
Every little bit helps.
Really do appreciate it. To begin, let's start with how you define space power in the context of U.S. Southern Command and the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. We have a unique area of responsibility in Southcom, and it's a mission unlike anything I've done in my 22 years. I tell my folks all the time, and I'll probably say this several times throughout the interview, but we are in the business of relationships. And what I mean by that is you think about other theaters, and you think about a large presence. You think about bases either in EUCOM or in CENTCOM or in INDOPACOM, where there's a lot of service members and a lot of equipment and a lot of things going on. And so here it's a little different in the Southcom AOR. And so not a lot of large bases with a lot of people and operations. And so what that means is we rely on and build partnerships and relationships with our allies and partners in the AOR. And you know, a great example of that is as it relates to space operations is in the area of space domain awareness. Currently, through our significant security cooperation initiative, SSCI, which I'll probably mention later as well, we're working with partners to understand their objectives and their needs, and delivering sensors such as telescopes, teaching them how to use them, and then hopefully incorporating that data into our space domain awareness picture. And so it's a mutually beneficial move in terms of that.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And obviously with that space domain awareness, the opportunity exists to look at potential threats that would impact operations there in the AOR. So I suspect part of that space domain awareness is, like we've heard from Master Sergeant Lurch from the Space Force S2, talks about potential ASAT threats in domain, talks about capabilities that could deny our capabilities in the space domain. So those are probably things you're thinking about on a regular basis, and present that information to your combatant commander leadership and also your partners.
Yes, absolutely. And so there are, not only are we interested in our assets and partner assets, but the other side is that as well. What are the competitors doing? What is the adversary doing? What threats exist to our space assets? Um, and you brought up an interesting point. How do you support not only our combatant command, but as we know, space is a global mission, right? And so we coordinate with our partners over at U.S. Space Command, whose AOR is essentially outer space, for lack of a better term. And so that coordination has to remain very close, because while we have geographic borders in our area of responsibility and we're focused on that, it's really a Western Hemisphere approach. Everything we do in our hemisphere, as it relates to space operations, affects NORTHCOM, SpaceCom, all the other combatant commands, and so that coordination is very important. And those threats really apply to everybody.
Yes, sir. You bring up a great point about that collaboration coordination with Space Force's space. The Space Force component to U.S. Space Command, responsible for the in domain fight, a lot of people would describe. And then your responsibility focuses on the terrestrial fight and making sure that uh, forces are supported from space and space capabilities there in the Southcom AOR. Can you talk a little bit about what for folks who don't know, what is a
Mhm.
Southcom AOR? How do you describe it to folks?
The Southcom area of responsibility is really, you think anything south of Mexico and the Caribbean minus Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is part of the United States, and so um, yeah, that all the Caribbean states and all the states that are starting with Belize, and south and all the way through Latin America, all the way through Central America, and down to the southern cone of Argentina and Chile.
And sir, congratulations for being the first commander of Space Forces South and standing that component up, realizing that there is a tremendous operational responsibility taking place down there. What does integration of space capabilities look like at the operational level within Southcom?
Yes, so that's a great question. So at really the command and control of the component commander, that essentially is the operational level. So on behalf of General Saltzman, we present and command and control forces to U.S. Southcom. So as an example, what that might look like is that if I'm the component commander, um, or the commander of Space Force forces, the Com Space 4, here at Davis Monthan, and we have some asset deployed to theater, whatever it happens to be. That chain of command runs directly through my team, right? And so, and what it looks like, on a practical matter, is like we have guardians here that will be either assigned or deployed to Space Forces Southern, at our command and control element. We Whether that's called a space operations center, or we haven't decided on a name for it yet, but we're working that out as a service. But there'll be some ops center, some ops floor, where our guardians are maintaining situational awareness, and you know uh, getting orders from the combatant command or the joint task force commander or whoever the supporting commander is, and distributing those orders, um, to the field of forces. And so that's essentially why a component exists.
Yeah, thank you, sir. A lot of people might not understand that, yeah, every service component presented to a respective combatant command has it's an ops center dedicated to that domain. And so a lot of folks aren't realizing that, hey, there are 5 domains that we're focusing on as United States military. It's cyber, land, air, maritime, and what we're talking about today is space. So what you're describing is developing an operations center that allows a confluence of all space capabilities in support of that combatant command in Southcom. So, sir, that makes complete sense, and really look forward to that continuing to develop. Let's talk a little bit about specific capabilities. So, how are space-enabled capabilities such as ISR, SATCOM, missile warning, and PNT supporting day-to-day missions in your AOR?
Yeah, so we're any brief we give when we talk about space operations and what it means. We we talk about the civil applications, and we mention, hey, if I'm briefing a class, I'll say, hey, who has a smartphone here, right? And everyone's got a smartphone, and then so we talk about things like communications. We talk about uh, position navigation and timing, PNT, which for us is GPS, the satellites, or overhead assets that are looking down at the Earth, either looking for images or for infrared signatures. And so, we talk about how it supports everyday life and how you can't really do anything without it. So the same applies militarily. If you any joint operation you can think of, whether it's maritime or air domain, those capabilities have to communicate, they have to navigate, they have to be aware of threats in the vicinity, they have to have awareness of what's going on around them. All of that happens through space capabilities. And so we used to call the mission area Space Force Enhancement, and we don't call it that anymore, but that's the classic space support, so support to joint operations. And that is one of the jobs, right, that we have as a Space Force component, is to monitor those capabilities and to make sure that the services are being provided to the warfighter.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Could you talk a little bit about, and I know you probably can't get into great detail, but obviously there were some pretty important operations that took place within your AOR recently. Can you just talk about generically how that mission planning took place, what type of coordination and collaboration had to happen? Don't have to talk about timelines or anything else
Sure.
to protect the innocent. Just talk about just the process by which how that all transpired because it really does lend credibility to the reason for standing up Space Forces Southern.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it was, as you say, it was a very interesting time. Just for context, when when we started the crisis action planning and the setting the theater phase, if you will, we were not an established component, and so legally, I was not able to do any requests for forces or really perform any operations because I was a staff member of headquarters Space Force, and so we communicated that through our chain of command, and General Saltzman's immediate response was, "Hey, got it. You guys are gonna activate right now." And then they got that rolling in a very quick way, very responsive, understood what was going on operationally, and we were able to activate. And so that was huge. And so what that enabled us to do is to, just as part of any mission planning, you do that mission analysis, and you look at your commander's intent and what was Southcom and what was the JTF saying. These are the things that we need, right? So these are the operations that we're doing. And so what does that mean in terms of people and assets from the Space Force? So that was really the first step. Is we had some augmentation from Space Forces Space, um, from Bobby Schmidt and his team. We had people from Space Delta 3, Space Delta 7, to come in and help us understand the problem, understand what assets might need to be in theater. And so once we figure that out, we put together an RFF. We figured out who needs to come to Davis Monthan and do the command and control that we mentioned, because all that stuff had not been invented yet, because we were still in the process of standing up a component just to figure out what a staff needs to look like, just so we can exist day to day. And so our timeline for standing up our operations capability was accelerated by at least a year, probably more. And so that, incidentally, that's driven changes to our programming plan and what we think the org chart needs to look like in the future. And we can talk about that more or less later. But so that was really the first step, right? Over the course of a couple months, is figuring out what needs to be in theater and who needs to be here to help command and control it. And you send that paperwork up through the combatant command. The combatant command sends it to the Joint Staff in the Pentagon, and they say yes or no. And it was yes in almost all cases. That turns into orders that people get. Hey, surprise, you're going wherever. And then people showed up here. We got them trained as quickly and proficiently as we could. And then we, when it was time to go, we were ready to go. And just as a coincidence, yesterday I had an envelope, a handwritten note from Chairman Kane, and it was addressed to me and the team, saying, "Hey, I just want to thank you for the work you did in Operation Absolute Resolve." And so that's something that I get to share with the team, and say, "Hey, all that work that we did and everything that you sacrificed, this is why we do it, right? I mean, it's not so that we can get a letter from the chairman, but it's so that we can accomplish a mission and save lives, and we did that. So really very unique, and probably the highlight of my 22 years. It's not something I ever thought I'd be involved with, especially in this AOR, but you never know, right? So you got to be ready.
Colonel Alford, really appreciate that deep dive into that, how that process worked. And really, it to me, it pulled out two very specific things that relate to space operations tactically and operationally. And then the third I'll talk about. But that first one that you mentioned is bringing tactical expertise to the planning environment. That's one. And then the other that you talked about was making sure folks were operationally trained once they arrived in the AOR. So that's another one. Something that the Space Forces are already thinking about, it sounds like, is how do we ensure tactical expertise is trained and inculcated at the Delta and squadron levels? And then what you've got is defining a need for operational expertise, how to integrate those capabilities into the JTF model. So very interesting. And then I tell you, I was talking to somebody else recently about this as well. There's no more better trained 4-star general officer, obviously holding the position of chairman, trained on multi-domain operations than Chairman Kane. He grew up in multi-domain operations, so I think he, more than most, understands the criticality of the Space Force providing the space superiority mission. So glad to see that the team is being recognized for all the warfighting efforts you guys are doing down there.
Yeah.
All right, sir, let's talk about regional partnerships. That's an important one. How do partnerships with allies and regional partners enhance space-enabled operations in the hemisphere?
Wow, it's such an important question. It's I don't exaggerate when I tell you that our day-to-day and our campaign in the Southcom AOR, our campaign plan is based on partnerships and our allies in the AOR. Um, I think I led with this, but I say it all the time. We are in the business of relationships, and so when we talk about resilience and we talk about space as a warfighting domain, how do you gain and maintain that resilience, and how do you gain and maintain space superiority when you don't have a lot of people and stuff in the AOR? And so the only answer, or there's really two answers, and the CSO is very clear about both of them. We rely on commercial integration, and we rely on partners and allies. And I don't exaggerate when I say that it is the most important thing that my team does is engage with our partners, find and understand where we have shared objectives and shared values, and then build on that, right? And so the best example is in the mission area of space domain awareness. Um, that is that's an important mission area for a couple reasons. Number one, and I'm not an SDA expert, but I have a little bit of background in my missile warning time. We also did the space surveillance, right? But it is the foundation for all space operations, right? Understanding what's out there, what it's doing, how it might be threatened, and what to do about it, right? So really, it's the more the better. And so we have some, I guess, call it gaps, right? You can't get into um, too much detail, and don't want to give anything away, but the Southcom AOR has a lot of opportunities, right, for building on that SDA picture. And so our partners and allies are very interested in that too, right? Not only because it makes sense so they can understand and they can do the SDA mission, but they also want to get into space operations just as as an enterprise. And there are some partners such as Brazil and Colombia, which are really fairly robust and advanced in terms of their military space capabilities, and some of our other partners are a little more nascent, right? And just getting started, but they understand the importance, and they want to be involved, and they want to be partners with the United States. Now, we use the term partner of choice. I was on a call with the civilian deputy commander of Southcom the other day, and she used the term indispensable partner, and I really like that. And so we want to be indispensable partners. Um, and so what that means then is that how do we then approach and engage our partners, and then include them and work with them in terms of our space operations. And so we do that a couple ways. We can work with them to deliver or develop sensors. In the case of the SSCI that we mentioned, that's a program through which we deliver space domain awareness telescopes, right? And once we deliver it, it's theirs, right? There's no conditions. There's no, hey, you can have this if you let us use it. That's not how it works. Now the hope is that we will work together and we will be able to leverage that data, and that's what ends up happening, right? And say, hey, the U.S. is a sincere partner, good faith partner. They're going to help us train and understand and develop these capabilities, and that's what the SSCI is all about. So that's the sensor part of it. That's the looking up, and then what do you do with that data? Where does it go? How do we put it all together? How do we integrate it and make it something useful, right? And so one of the ways we do that, and we mentioned commercial capabilities, is through the Joint Commercial Operations Cell, the JCO. And so that's an organization that we work very closely with. When we go down to the AOR and engage with partners, they're usually with us, so that they can explain, here's how it works, here's how you can plug into this enterprise, and it's all virtual ops center. It's really quite fascinating stuff that you and I, as lieutenants, if we talked about these things, we would have been in a classified environment. And so when I see these things, it just blows my mind that we're able to just talk about this, not even at unclassified. It's not classified. And so it's a long answer to your question, but integration of space capabilities in this AOR is it's essential that it's built on partnerships, and it's essential that it's built as much as possible in the unclassified environment.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I love those points that you made about commercial augmentation, because that's really where the Space Force, I think, is thriving. better than any other service right now, honestly, is integrating commercial technology to augment the capabilities you need to ensure your space superiority mission is gained and maintained. So, really interesting, especially with there's a couple of events coming up. Let's talk about what's happening in Chile in the near future. It's called FIDE, I think. Can you talk a little bit about that and what your engagement looks like for that event?
Absolutely. FIDI and the Space Summit that's associated with that. Um, it's uh, it's a huge event for our Chilean partners, um, and so one of the um, one of the engagements that I'll be there to do personally is to speak about space domain awareness, the strategic importance of SDA, and why the United States and Chile are natural partners, and where that partnership's going to go. And so I was just yesterday in a meeting with the Chilean two-star who's in charge of their space organization. I forget what it's called, but and those were his words exactly. And he asked me if I would be able to do that. I said, yes, sir, I would be happy to do that. And so those are the kind of engagements that our partners see that. That's important to them. It matters who you send. And so me as the commander, personally making that trip, I believe I believe the AF South commander is also traveling down to Fidei, and other DVs. But that's it's sort of the seminal event for the Chilean Air Force, and their space capabilities as well. Um, so yeah, those are the types of engagements that we do quite regularly, and those are the opportunities we seek so that we can build upon those partnerships.
And so building on those partnerships, so critical when you talk about how each government has the propensity to help. They want to help. They just need to be told exactly how they can help. And so not going back to, capability gap assessment or anything else, but simply talking, uh, everyone is racing to get into space. It's a way for a government to be considered credible on the world stage. And so there's so many opportunities, I think, especially in the Southcom AOR, to get involved in space. And one of those, I suspect, is space launch. So eventually, that might be something that you all are thinking about in terms of how to set up more space launch complexes in the Southcom AOR, such that we can get more capabilities on orbit as needed. Is that something you guys are starting to think about?
Yes, absolutely. That's something we see. Um, now that's at a very high level. That's almost at a department and cabinet level discussions, but it is happening, and we do track it. And so for example, with Brazil, very interested, very good locations near the equator and on the coast, and also Peru is interested in developing a spaceport. Now, that's not to say that this is not the United States going into these partner nations and building space launch facilities. It's not that. It's consulting and coaching, enabling these countries to build their own. But when they see that assistance and they see that cooperation, that's just more to build upon as a credible partner, as a partner of choice or an indispensable partner. So, sometimes it's not the people and the stuff and the money, but it's the expertise, right? And it's the coordination and it's the advice, and so that means a lot to our partners.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And just for learning the process about how the amount of work that you have to do down there, the amount of collaboration that you have to kind of constantly go through on a regular basis. Can you talk a little bit about your collaboration with Air Marshal Godfrey, for example, who
Mhm.
has he's been told by the CSO, hey, I need you to help me with international engagement. So can you talk a little bit about how that conversation goes, or if there's a battle rhythm such that you have that dialogue with Air Marshal Godfrey?
Yes. So um, not as much with him one on one, but through his through the Space Force headquarters, we have regular touch points with his team and with General Chess's team, with General Miller's team in the S5, and so all that all that ties together into someone at headquarters looking at my list of travel plan for the next year and saying, okay, how does this support this particular plan that I signed, and that's a very real thing, and that's a conversation we have quite regularly with our touch points. And so yes, it's been very eye-opening and very encouraging to see the support and the importance that Headquarters Space Force puts on these international engagements and these partnerships. Because when you come to Southcom, that's really the bread and butter. And it so in that regard, it's a little different than being in other theaters. But at least from what I've observed, it is really starting to be an item that they take very seriously at headquarters. And I think it's what's most interesting is how better to demonstrate and for lack of a better term, put your money where your mouth is when it comes to international engagements, but to have a UK officer in charge of that for you. And so that I just think that's so cool. It says, hey, we're not just going to talk about it. We're doing it. Here it is. And the guy in charge of it is a partner. And so I think that's pretty neat.
Yes, sir. Just another way I think the Space Force is demonstrating how to successfully engage internationally and kind of leading the charge
Mhm.
across the services. So, very well done. Let's talk about collaboration. We talked about collaboration at the headquarters level. Let's talk about cross collaboration if we can for just a moment. Are you talking to your other Space Force components to come up with best practices? I mean, you're relatively new to the position, and your component just recently stood up. However, Space Force components have been established around the globe. So, how does that collaboration and coordination take place?
Yes, that has been huge. And so that happens in several ways. And so we start with the Space Force back when Lieutenant General Burt was the COO, and now with Lieutenant General Chess as not the COO anymore. It's called the S347. But the guy in charge of ops
Yeah. Yeah.
for the CSO, we as components fall under them, and so every step of the way since I've been involved with this, even back in 2022 when I was in IUD and we stood up Space Forces Central Space Center. Headquarters has been extremely interested in what do you guys need, and in the forum where everybody comes together, all the different components, and the precursor to a component is called an IMAT, an initial mission analysis team. So all the IMATs and all the components that are already established all get together in the same room at least twice a year at my level, with the 3-star sitting there saying what lessons have we learned, what do you guys need, and then really at the director and the action officer level we meet every other week, certainly at least every other month in a virtual setting to talk about lessons learned and to talk about here are the steps that you go through when you establish a component. It's been very deliberate, and that has been very helpful. So that's the collaboration in terms of establishing components. And now, what about once you're up and running, and you know, for example, the the lessons learned that we just took from these recent operations, how does that get distributed? And it's the same way. It's the same forum. We meet all all the component operations directorates, the S3s. They meet weekly. We meet with all the components meet with S4S weekly for an update. So it's really part of your battle rhythm every single day, and there's really no more stovepipes. We know what the other components are doing. They know what we're doing, and so as much as everyone loves Teams and virtual meetings like this, there's even more reasons to love it, right? Is that we're really able to maintain that connection, and it's really been helpful because, as we said earlier, part of that lead up to OAR was finding those folks at S4S that understood here's how you set up operational C2 for Space Forces, and our friends at the Deltas, that we knew those folks, not only through experience and personal time together, but through these collaboration, through these regular touch points, and that's really what it's all about. So when it's time to go to the well and say, okay, now I really need your help because things are really happening, and they show up without a question, and we get it done.
So you bring up a point that I think is a misconception that people think, hey, this is the first time we're ever thinking about this. But the reality is, Guardians have been doing this for years, and even before the Space Force,
Mhm.
the Air Force Space Command and other components have been and other services have been doing this for a long time. So let's talk about that for just a moment in terms of how you take those best practices and you bring the tacticians into the discussion and you talk about how do we exercise this so that
Mhm.
this isn't the first time we're seeing it. So talk a little bit about what exercises have you participated in the past, or what exercises is Space Forces Southern going to participate in the future to ensure that you establish the necessary repetitions and sets needed to make these planning efforts just rote memory?
Sure. So large exercises and cross combatant command exercises are a big part of our calendar, provided real world ops aren't going on. And so every year, and we can talk about the Southcom AOR. Um, every year we do exercises with partner nations that they host. Example is Tapio with I think it's Brazil hosts Tapio, um, and we have a big exercise called Panamax, which as the name might imply, focuses on Panama. And so those are that's just a couple examples. In my experience, just like probably everybody else did an exercise in Korea, which was air component focused, and so in all those cases, it it is how do we how do we support the joint fight, and how do we command and control any forces that might be assigned to the component. As you mentioned, the legacy of space operations is through the Air Force and the air component. And so when I showed up here as actually director of Space Forces, which is an Air Force thing, right? And how an advisor on the proper employment of space power, um, for the Comafor. And so from that idea, that's a well established, that's a well established idea. That's something that the air component and most guardians who grew up as airmen are comfortable with. And so that was really our foundation, and that's what we built off of. And so as we as we establish our own identity and establish our own operations capabilities, we have that foundation, but it's also something unique. And so the history of all those exercises, like we mentioned, that's been very important in shaping our understanding on how we do this as a separate component. It's probably not unlike um, how the Air Force got its start from the Army, and understanding air power in terms of how it supported ground operations, and it just evolved from there.
Yeah, I always like to talk about whenever I get in these. We've been living this for years, Colonel.
Yeah.
You remember the command and control discussions that we've had at the tactical and operational and strategic levels for years, and so I always come back to think about, is there a space ops directive that you look at on a regular basis that describes the C2 authorities that you maintain there in your AOR for space assets?
Yeah. So as a new component, that's the expectation, and so we were starting to develop with these past operations our own space tasking order, and space operations directive, or some space part to the air operations directive, kind of where that grew from. But that's all going to be established, and that's certainly the expectation for all these components. If you're going to have a separate space component, then you need to have a space component campaign support plan. You need to have support plans to con plans and no plans for the combatant command, and you need to have a mechanism, right, to transmit those orders and to command and control your forces. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir. From your perspective, what misconceptions exist about the role of space in regional security operations?
Misconceptions. Um, yeah, let me tell a quick story because I like that question. When I was in Santiago for the South America Defense Council or Conference, South Deck, in 2024. And so that, very, very high level officials there. General Richardson, the Southcom commander at the time, Chairman Brown was there. So I got to stand in the same elevator. It was very intimidating. But that very, very high level from all the partners that you might imagine. And one of the topics, and the reason I was there, one of the topics was space. And so towards the end of the event, when sort of going around to all the different heads of the military, and they were all kind of saying the same thing. And even some of the smaller countries that you wouldn't think of very much when you think of space. Hey, we want to contribute. We don't have very much in terms of capabilities, but we're very interested. And that really stuck with me because I think in their minds they were thinking, hey, if I want to be a player in space operations, I need to be able to launch satellites. I need to have hundreds of satellites in there that I have a bunch of command and control stations, and so I need to look like the United States, or some of the peers, just in terms of how much stuff I have in. And I thought to myself, that's a paradigm that's just not true anymore. If you have this laptop that I'm looking at right now, and a Wi-Fi connection, um, we can plug into JCO. We can do space domain awareness because we are able to leverage commercial sensors, commercial capabilities, and a virtual operations space. So the answer to your question is, the misconception is that in order to participate, in order to be relevant in the space domain, you need 50 years of launch expertise and capabilities, and you need tons of satellites. It's just not the case anymore. What you need is a need for space capabilities, and then some way to harness that, and that's something that we're able to provide to our partners, and so that's really a game changer. And that's not a term I like to use very much because it's overused, but I feel like the integration of commercial capabilities and the declassification of a lot of things has been quite the game changer.
Yeah, concur, sir. Plenty of opportunity, and what you just described is a really good news story
Yes.
for our international partners who want to help, want to be part of the fight, and want to contribute to helping continue the effort to ensure freedom of action in the space domain, for a prosperous civil future and for a prosperous space economy future. So, phenomenal work being done by you and your team. Looking ahead, what developments in space capabilities will most significantly impact how Southcom operates in the coming years?
I think, first and foremost, I think the growth of this component is something that I look to, and then because that growth, along with our ability to to command and control and to perform space operations is growing alongside our partners in the AOR. And so as those organizations become more mature, we start to look at things such as placement, such as access. Um, a very big lesson learned from recent operations is where are we going to put things, and how do we get them there quickly? And in order to do that, you don't have to, but it really helps if your partner nations are willing and amenable to that. And so that's really one of the reasons why. And so I think you'll see a just more robust presence in that way, if that makes sense.
Yes, sir. Sure does. It goes back to your partnership discussion. And as long as you keep those partners on in the discussion in terms of what the needs are for them and the U.S. To talk about how to integrate capabilities and technologies, and then do the necessary planning, and then document that necessary planning and the appropriate documentation that you just alluded to, so that you can, on a moment's notice, pull it off the shelf and get to work.
Absolutely.
Colonel Alford, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy schedule and joining us here, and for your leadership integrating space power into U.S. Southern Command. Any closing comments, sir?
I don't. Hey, it is absolutely my pleasure. So, and I thank you for your interest, and I thank you for being interested in what we do here. And as always, I thank you for your friendship, and it is great to see you as always.
Great to see you, sir. Thank you so much. And until next time, Semper Supra.
Semper Supra.
That was my interview with Colonel Brandon Alford. These conversations are an important part of understanding how space power is evolving, not just at the strategic level, but in the day-to-day missions that shape regional security. If you found this discussion valuable, be sure to follow or subscribe to Space Power wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss future conversations with military leaders, policymakers, and industry experts shaping the future of the space domain. You can also follow the Space Force Association to stay connected with the broader dialogue around national space power. Once again, I'm Bill Woolf, founder of the Space Force Association, Legacy Guardian #1. Thanks for joining me today. Space Power is produced by Ty Holliday. We'll see you next time.